Hi everybody, and welcome to today's discussion here between the UK High Commission in Namibia and Tribe Fire Studios. They've been gracious enough to host us, and we look forward to having a really quality discussion. We have a very special guest here today who comes from the UNDP, Ms. Martha Naanda. Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Martha Naanda, and I look forward to a really quality discussion. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thank you very much for extending the invitation to us and for extending our collaboration in this matter.
No, I appreciate it. I know I have politely dragged you from leave, and I highly appreciate that you did come and are part of this discussion. So today's discussion is on COP26 and climate change. You know, two of the big events and big challenges of our generation, climate change in particular. And I think sort of before we get more into that, I think the UNDP and the UN has always played a really big role in combating climate change and global issues in general. I mean, historically, that's the root of the UN. And I was an intern at the UN, at UNEC actually at some point, so I have a soft spot for it as well. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about the UNDP in Namibia for those who are not too familiar with it? You know, what is the UNDP and what is UNDP here in Namibia? Just to give them a picture of it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think UNDP, globally, we are actually trying to deal with three things.
Yes.
But maybe just before I get to the three things we are trying to do in this current era where we are, UNDP is really trying to accelerate progress towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals,
SDGs.
All 17 goals, because we play this role as an integrator. So all goals are important, different entry points, but we need to accelerate progress so that we can attain the goals.
Yes.
Specifically for UNDP Namibia, we are trying to build resilience to eradicate poverty and address inequalities.
Right.
And basically we are doing this, I think, through our three interconnected work streams.
Okay.
Now, the first work stream, which I'll elaborate more because I think it's where your interest is what we call the Sustainable Environmental Management and Enhanced Resilience.
Sounds
the
good.
second stream is the Sustainable Inclusive Green Growth.
Okay.
And the third one is Governance, Responsible Institutions, and Civic Engagement, because UNDP Namibia really works in partnership and collaboration with many partners from public, private, and civic or civil society.
Yes. Yeah.
And this includes as well academia and think tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think that in many ways reflects sort of what I've always understood the UN to be, which is this connector of ideas for a common purpose. And I guess right now, what really narrows and focuses our purpose are the SDGs. And I guess in many ways, the SDGs are a great starting point for this discussion insofar as climate change affects all of them, every single one of them. And you know, in that sense, in Namibia, that's especially true. And I think your three pillars reflect that very much. Insofar as, you know, people's livelihoods are affected by a multitude of factors. We know Namibia is one of the most unequal countries in the world. And we know that means that, you know, that largely means a lot of people don't have a sense of resilience to some of the climate disasters that can happen. And we can get into a lot more of that later. But I think the UNDP championing that collaboration for development role is really key, and more now than ever before. So maybe in that sense, as we get into climate change, I think a lot of viewers are familiar with the concept, but how would you describe climate change to our audience?
Okay, I think I would describe it in simpler terms.
Yes.
Instead of using the jargons, the greenhouse gases, it's basically changes in the mean temperatures.
Yeah.
And changes really in the rainfall patterns. We know already, for example, in Namibia, the rainfall patterns have always been unpredictable, but the frequencies, the occurrences, and the intensities are very increasing. And for a farmer, what is climate change? It's basically when the rain doesn't come on time. Even when it comes on time, it's not adequate or enough. And the time it rains, it doesn't enable, for example, growth for crops. And then if it's a livestock farmers, of course, it impacts water shortages or availability of water. And the grasses that the livestock will eat, etc., etc. So I can simplify it basically that these changes in climate impacts not just the people, of course, when they don't have food to eat, but as well their means of livelihood, be it crop production or livestock production, which we know in Namibia livestock production is very critical. But it even impacts our tourism sector, because when you look at the wildlife, they depend basically on available fodder, they depend on water to drink and everything.
Yes.
So it's basically all these changes. But more importantly, I think why we care so much about climate change, it impacts our economic development efforts.
That's right.
So it impacts our energy, or basically it gives us the opportunity to consider our energy or electricity generation in the country, so that we can increase, be it the production through renewable energies or through hydropowers or wind, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's 100% right. And I guess sort of the way you framed it really captures a lot of the spirit and the vision of COP26. And I think we can get quite a bit into that. But I think one key element that you mentioned is really about how climate change affects people on the ground. And the way you framed it and the position you took was really as a farmer speaking outward. And we know sort of the majority of people in this country depend on farming, and a huge part of that depend on subsistence farming. So it's not for any commercial gain, it's for the food you put on your plate. And if that's not available, very often people just don't have that kind of option. So I think that's really well put. And I guess it is to say that, you know, all of that, and climate change can be a very complicated discussion. There's a lot of jargon in that. And I think, as you mentioned, in Namibia, those are the key points that people should focus on. And it is this fact that from a water levels, we don't have the same security. From a food perspective levels, it has have an impact on food security. It has an impact on people's livelihoods. It has an impact on economic development. I mean, in urban centers, climate change can affect the cost of water, the cost of electricity. It can really go quite far. And then, of course, people have the momentum and hype around renewable technologies and the opportunities around that. And of course, we're all really happy to see that in most parts of the world, the cost of renewable energy is dropping. It's dropping drastically, making it more affordable for everybody. And I think that speaks to the ability of urban and rural communities to adapt and to have a sense of resilience to what we're talking about. Do you maybe want to touch a little bit more on sort of how you see the urban centers being affected by climate change? You really painted a really good picture of maybe the farmer in the rural space. What about people here sort of sitting in town, sitting in Windhoek or Rundu, wherever they are? How do you see it having a really big impact in sort of their everyday lives?
I think people in urban areas are impacted directly and indirectly.
Right.
Of course, food production mainly occurs in urban areas. So we see the impacts, or we can describe the impacts much easily, but it impacts the urban community, especially looking at the Namibia social system, which is very connected. It's not just the environment, the social and the networks and the economy. It's very linked. But I think if you can just articulate one impact that is more obvious in the urban setting, is basically water shortages or introduction of diseases, which are indirectly related to the climate change effects, in the way in which this water shortages is it's now revealing itself in, especially I think what I want to call as concentrated informal areas, where you have lots of people occupying the same space. Not each and every household is connected to its own potable water, and then using different other facility for sanitations. And some new diseases, in the sense that they are happening now in Namibia, like hepatitis E, which is really related to the use of sanitation services and lack of water when people are not able to clean hands often, etc. But other than that, I think even food production in urban areas is being impacted because of the cost associated now with the importing the food and bringing this food on the table. It's a whole value chain. Of course, in the urban areas is more pertinent in the sense that you see it every day if you live in a city, but it's connected to the rural areas and how the rural area food production system sustains the urban areas.
That's exactly right. And I like how you're painting that value chain, because you're right. I mean, it is one thing, most people are concentrating themselves to the city, and as you said, sort of there are these peri-urban spaces, and we've seen many of them building outside of Windhoek over the past couple of years. And you're right. I mean, sanitation is always one of the big hiccups because, you know, things are built in a sense that aren't really very organized, quite hastily. But people are just trying to have a place to live, be closer to opportunities. You know, you do understand why people are trying so hard to get closer to these kind of opportunities. And climate change puts a lot of those people at risk, for sure. So in that sense, how would you describe adaptation to climate change? How would you describe that so that people understand, you know, when we talk about when we talk about these challenges and we promote adaptation for these communities, how would you describe that to people?
You know, community adaptation, it's an evolving word and concept.
Yes.
But it have many elements. I would definitely define it in the sense of having abilities, communities having abilities to adapt, to cope, to prevent and to recover and bounce back better from a shock.
Excellent.
Now that shock can be climate related or health related, like we just have the COVID-19, it's a health shock. But if communities are not able to prevent it or at least adapt to it quickly so that they bounce back and they are able to continue functioning as a system, as a household, as a community in a manner that they don't compromise their long-term viability of pursuing their sustainable development. So I think in short, it's the communities having the abilities to adapt, to prevent in a prepared manner, anticipate so that they can reduce the shocks or they can reduce the negative impacts in a manner that does not compromise the way they can sustain their living in future.
Yeah, and one big thing sort of for the UK is obviously the need to help communities be more resilient. And I think what you've described is a resilient community. As part of COP26, which is a convening of heads of state, scientists and experts from around the world to find quality long-term solutions to climate change for Namibia, for the UK and for the global population. It's happening in November in the UK. One element is resilience, especially in countries that are vulnerable. Especially in countries that are developing nations, countries that maybe, for example, Namibia has been going through a pretty tough economic challenge the past couple of years. So that also gives us an extra level of issues to come back to and to deal with when building resilient communities. Sort of how do you see the vision of a resilient community in Namibia? And I mean, you can pick an example if you'd like as well.
Yeah, again, resilience is really an effort for a community to be able to have certain type of capacities. I think for us in UNDP, we mainly focus on the 5 different ones. And these are evolving from the usual 3 ones, the adaptive, the anticipative, and the transformative capacities. But in this case, we added the preventive capacities as well as the anticipative capacity, which basically it's absorptive capacities. This is the abilities of these communities to be able not only to take action and bounce back, as I said earlier, which is the adaptation, but they are able to do it in a predetermined manner. And then, of course, the adaptive capacity one, which is to make incremental adjustment, modification or changes to an existing one so that they can actually address the threats in a manner that they are not negatively affected beyond their capacities. Or the anticipative one, which is mainly basically to have an anticipatory capacities able to detect or a potential threat and then be able to reduce their likely impacts. The preventive is basically to prevent or to bounce back within existing risks or actually be able to avoid the creation of new risk, because preventive is as well having the avoidance. And then the transformative one, which I would say it's more the ability to fundamentally operate in a new system when be it your ecological, economic or social structures are basically threatened by that risk. So when a community has those type of capacities, then of course it's towards a resilient community.
100%. I must tell you, Naanda, I think everyone borrows the frameworks from the UN from time to time, because I know you guys structure it really, really well and try and encompass as many issues as possible. Sort of as we come towards the end of our discussion, it'd be really interesting to give the public maybe a few examples of what the UNDP has been doing here in country, and maybe some things that the UNDP was looking forward to doing in the future, sort of within that adaptation resilience space in here in country.
Okay, I think as I started our interview here, I talked about the interconnectedness of our system, which is trying basically to build resilience, eradicate poverty, as well as to eradicate poverty and then build the institutional capacity. So in UNDP Namibia specifically, I think we have been trying to support the small-scale farmers to build their resilience towards climate change impacts, be it from droughts, which is the lack of water, or from too much floods, which is too much rain. And then specifically, I think it's just promoting the adoption of conservation agriculture or climate-smart practices, zero tillage, water conservation, increasing soil fertilities, and then timing your planting so that you do early planting. In terms of resilience, I think we are still in the process of supporting Namibia, particularly through our collaborative effort with the Office of the Prime Ministers to develop the National Resilience Building Strategy with a costed action plan. And we are really hoping that this resilience strategy will look not only to some elements of capacity building, but inclusive and considering new type of risks, which are zoonotic related.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really good. And I know the Office of the Prime Minister has the Disaster Risk Management Unit within it. And I know sort of that, I guess that really helps the link in terms of making sure you're having quality discussions about the risk that people are facing on an everyday level. That really is quite something. And I guess, you know, I have to say, Naanda, I always, I suppose, as a kid had a dream for you know, what the UN represented globally. Sort of this vision of bringing people together for common purposes and common well-being. Sort of given that, in fact, we have this huge existential threat of climate change, and it's going to take more effort than we've ever put in to solve a singular problem, sort of how do you see the UN's role evolving in terms of supporting countries solve that problem? How do you see that vision playing out?
I think the UN vision has always been really trying to bring about an inclusive change and an inclusive sustainable development process. But particularly in terms of the COP26, the UN has been trying to actually increase the voices of the people. And particularly for us from UNDP, we have engaged a game which is called Mission 1.5, which is basically the people climate choice. And then the people, which is basically the society, it was a global game played, Namibia included, have been able actually to try to influence policymakers' decision towards the type of decisions and policies they can enact, in be it on energy, in transport, in food production, in tourism or nature-based enterprises, etc. But the UN, particularly in Namibia, has been trying to provide evidence. Because decision-making, if it's not informed by evidence and data, then it may miss some of those populations which are being really impacted by the unequal development effort. So we try really to provide the evidence in terms of the policies to be made, so that those policies really target those who need the support. And I think that is the value. As a whole UN, globally, we are trying to support the countries to formulate policies. Namibia specifically is the NDC, National Determined Contributions, so that when they identify their policy options and strategies, then they are able basically to target the intervention to those who need it. I think you are aware that Namibia currently still have 17% of the population households living in poverty. So they need to be targeted so they are not more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change or the impacts of any other risks and shocks.
And you're 100% right. I guess in that sense, it really is quite something that the UNDP always tries and positions itself so that it's connected to development partners, government, and the people on the ground. And I think in that sense, that's the common spirit we want at COP26, really convening those voices, because really leaders have a certain privileged position in terms of what they can view, but really no one knows better about their community than those that live in it and the challenges that they go through. And it's always important that we listen to people from the communities themselves. I think UNDP does a really great job in making sure there's always that channel available, both for development partners such as ourselves or for host governments like Namibia. Thank you very much, Naanda. I don't know if you have any closing words before we end off our discussion. I think if we wanted to, we could chat for quite a while.
Thank you so much. And the people's voices on climate, I think they will reveal what are their expectations and what are some of the policy intervention the global community can do. UNDP, we are supporting the government, supporting the people of Namibia, and of course we want to build resilience, we want to support eradication of poverty, and we want to address inequality so that the lives and the livelihood of the people whom we serve are not negatively impacted by any shocks or crisis. And 100%. Thank you for the High Commission for partnering with us on this.
You're always welcome.
On this matter, and I hope you look forward to hosting COP26.
Definitely, and then sort of I think in that sense, the UK really is trying to be a valuable partner to all, both to Namibia and to the UNDP and abroad. And I'm sure we will have follow-up discussions about where we can interact to have the best impact for the people on the ground. And I think sort of ending there, I think you made a very pertinent point that you really can only solve problems that you can measure. And I think that is something that the UN has always been really good in, and I think the UK also values, that we measure the kind of impact we're having for local communities and making sure that it's sustainable over the long term. Thank you very much, Naanda. It's been really great having you. Maybe we can find ourselves again on this show. Let's see how the year goes. Thank you very much, obviously, Tribe Fire Studios, and to all of you for listening. If you'd like to find more information, please Google UNDP Namibia. The UN house is in Klein Windhoek on Stein Street, so you can always just pop by and have a visit. All the SDGs are on the wall, so you can't really miss them. If you want to find out more about COP26 and climate change, please visit ukcop26.org. There's a lot more information there. And of course, visit us at the High Commission. Don't be a stranger. Thank you very much for your time and take care.